Steve Hoagie. I'm on the staff of EPA's Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water here in Washington, D.C. So first, before we get started on the webinar, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. I just wanted to let you know that we've sent copies of the presentation to all those who have registered, so check your email. I sent it out about an hour and a half ago. If you registered recently, then maybe you didn't get it. But if you did not receive the presentation in your email, then just send us a chat message using the question box that's located on your tools panel as shown on the screen here. We will send you a copy immediately after the webinar is over today. You may have to click on the small box with the plus sign on it in order to expand the question box so you can type into it. So just type in your message and click on send. And you'll also be using that question box during the webinar to send us questions that you have for the speakers, as well as to give us ideas on topics that we should consider for future webinars. So make sure that you learn how to use that mailbox or that question box. So I just want to emphasize that we encourage you to submit questions to any of the speakers at any time during the webinar, and we'll be monitoring your questions. We'll bring up as many questions as we have time for during the question and answer period that's going to follow each speaker. Also, I wanted to point out that if you run into any problems during the broadcast, such as screen not showing or you're having poor audio quality or some other issue, then feel free to call the GoToWebinar toll-free technical support line. The number that's shown on your screen, the 1-800-263-6317. Choose option 2 to be connected to somebody who can help you. The last thing to note is that we've muted all the phone lines in order to maintain good audio quality. So in order to communicate with us, please use the question box that I mentioned earlier to send us a text message. I think we've got, okay. So now I'd like to introduce Mindy Eisenberg, who's here with us, and she'll give us an overview of today's webinar and kick off our presentation on the Non-Community Workgroup. Mindy is Chief of the Protection Branch in EPA's Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water, and she oversees the capacity development and operator certification programs, as well as rules implementation, tribal drinking water programs, and several other initiatives. I think she probably needs no introduction because most of you probably know Mindy, but here's Mindy.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. Hopefully everyone can see the screen, or patching. Mandatory patching is when you don't want it. Anyway, so for today's webinar, I'm going to kick things off and talk a little bit about why we wanted to have a dialogue on non-community water systems, and then Steve is going to talk about our work group and then the findings and recommendations report. And then we're going to turn to Sarah Flanagan with the state of Maine to talk about how Maine has communicated with non-community water systems over time. And then Julie Spangler with the state of Ohio is going to talk about what they've been doing to improve non-community compliance. And then wrapping things up and talking about some of the next steps that we have in mind and where we want to have some input from all of you is Jerry Smith with the state of Minnesota, and then Steve Hoagie here at EPA. Okay, slide. So why did we want to focus on non-communities? For those of you who are in the capacity development program, you know that EPA and states started working on re-energizing the capacity development program, oh gosh, over 4 years ago now. And there were so many good things to be talking about with the program and how it had been implemented over a course of about 10 years. And what we ended up focusing on was the community water systems. When we touched on non-communities and communities, it kind of became maybe a little too broad. So we figured, well, let's just focus on communities for now and come back to non-communities later. So that's what we did. We recognize that non-community water systems can be quite different from communities, that their characteristics are quite different, and some of the challenges that they have are different, and certainly from a state perspective, how you work with them can vary. As we know, non-communities don't charge rates the way a community water system will. Most of the transients don't have certified operators, and so there are a variety of issues, and when you're dealing with a non-community where water is kind of secondary to whatever line of business they're engaged in, whether they're a restaurant or a hospital or a school. And so we recognize that communication with them, education, operator levels are all kind of different. So we figured we would have a discussion to talk about all the kind of challenges and best practices that have been developed over time to help non-communities reliably provide safe drinking water. So as you know, about 2/3 of all public water systems are non-communities, and that's about 104,000 non-communities across the country, serving about 19 million people. And as you know, the vast majority of them are very small systems. And when we say very small, we're looking at systems that serve fewer than 500 people. And about 85,000 of the non-communities are transient. And we also have noted that about 21,000 non-communities are only serving water seasonally. So this is a graphic showing the distribution and types of non-communities. So about 1/3 of non-communities are recreational areas, whether they're like a part of a national park or a campground or something like that. Restaurants make up about another 29% of non-communities, and schools account for 10%, with industrial and agricultural facilities representing about 8% of the total. So we have a variety of different kinds, and each one requires kind of something special, I think, as we work with them. So you all are probably familiar with some of the compliance challenges that small systems face. The total coliform rule, it represents kind of our largest number of violations across the country, and non-communities are certainly challenged with the total coliform rule. Arsenic violations represent the next highest number of violations for non-communities. And there are also a significant number of lead action level exceedances, and then follow-on violations for the lead and copper rule, and then also violations for the stage 1 disinfection byproduct rule. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Steve to talk about our non-community work group.
Thank you, Mindy. So the non-community work group was launched in June of 2012, and it met actively for a period of about 1 year, and then there were a couple of follow-up meetings after that. The work group was hosted by EPA and made up of representatives from 8 states, Minnesota, Ohio, Michigan, New Hampshire, Maine, Nevada, and Utah. We also had EPA regions 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8, as well as ASDWA, and then later on we were joined by EPA's Office of Research and Development. So as you can see here, the purposes for the work group included identifying specific challenges that non-community systems face, and then along with that, the challenges that the states face in regulating these systems and trying to assist them in compliance. We had the work group look at approaches and just share with each other approaches that they were aware of that could be shared with systems to help them meet their requirements and maintain compliance. We also wanted to identify additional resources and explore opportunities to assist non-community systems. And we wanted to be able to provide input to the revised total coliform rule implementation activities and products just to make sure that they would adequately address the non-community audience. So the work group looked at a particular topic in depth at each meeting. Here's a listing of what we looked at. We looked at outreach and educating non-community systems. We examined seasonal systems and looked at the proposed RTCR. And as part of that discussion, we had the RTCR EPA staff participate with us so they could be sensitive to some of the issues. We also looked at how we could define managerial and financial capacity for non-community systems and how that's unique and different from community systems. We looked at operators for these kinds of non-community systems and what the certification requirements are. And we also looked at various approaches that could be used for partnering with other agencies, both within the drinking water program as well as outside of the program, in order to reach non-community systems. And finally, we identified technical capacity issues and how to maintain compliance for these systems. So in terms of the the work group, we had all these discussions, and we tried to compile the essence of our discussions and findings into a report. And this report is just about done. We expect to post it on the EPA website later on this spring or early summer, and we'll send out notification to all of you who've registered for this webinar once that's available. So what we did is we broke down our findings and recommendations into 3 main groups, or 3 main themes that you can see on the screen here. So one was to conduct outreach and education that's very specific to the needs of non-community systems. The second area was to assist the systems with their capacity challenges. The third area was to look at practices that make use of the limited resources that we have, especially the state staffs have very limited resources, so we want to find effective and efficient techniques that we can use to address the needs. So for each one of these topic areas, we organized it basically as chapters in this document, and then for each of these topic areas, we identified specific challenges, we made specific recommendations, and then for each of those recommendations, we gave a full description, including some case examples. Now we have to advance the slide. You have to do it then. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the goal or focus of the first theme was to capture the challenges that are in the area of outreach and education. I mean, some of these systems are scattered, they're remote, there are a huge number of these systems. So there are large inventory is an issue. Another issue is making the materials relevant to these systems. As you know, a lot of these systems are very sensitive to the economy. There's a lot of turnover, changes in ownership. So it's very difficult to maintain knowledge transfer. And then for seasonal systems, a lot of times making sure that they conduct proper monitoring as well as being aware of the proper shutdown or startup procedures is often an issue. So as I mentioned, we tried to collect a number of examples, and here we're just giving just a few examples, but in the report itself and actually in the appendix to the report, there's a more comprehensive listing and description of many examples around the country of these different techniques. So in the area of outreach and education, for example, in Nebraska, the state does require certification for operators of transient systems, but the state offers free training and no fees for exams or licenses, and they provide adequate training for those people, or they make it available. Another example of training is in Utah, for example. There are a lot of facilities in the various parks, and so the U.S. Forest Service type facilities are covered in a kind of a sector sort of a presentation the state provides that addresses specifically training for those types of systems that are located in the parks. In the area of outreach, we've found that the key is to really provide high quality material that's non-technical, it's visually appealing, colorful, easy to read, and generally no longer than 5 pages. So in Nevada, for example, they provide systems with a short pamphlet on the various requirements, sampling, record keeping, sanitary survey information, etc. In a number of states, they provide like a how-to guide on these kinds of similar sorts of issues, including protecting wells from contamination, cross-contamination, and contact information for getting technical assistance. So for example, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, a number of states have those kinds of guides. Texas maintains a database of contract operators, and Ohio has a startup and shutdown checklist for seasonal non-community systems, and I know other states have that also. Okay. So in the second theme area, assisting non-community systems with capacity challenges, the focus was to capture challenges in the areas of technical, managerial, and financial capacity, and then to try to identify some solutions. So as you know, these kinds of systems often struggle to access funding sources to address their compliance issues. Very often, they do not qualify for like a drinking water SRF loan, or maybe they have a low profit margin. Their business model doesn't take into account providing a water service, for example. Often the generally, probably the technical, managerial, and financial capacity of a non-community system is not known or it's not assessed. So very often there are deficiencies that are just not noticed until compliance issues occur. And then, as we mentioned earlier, some non-community systems have difficulty meeting the requirements for contaminant removal, for monitoring and reporting. And non-community systems often don't properly manage or oversee or effectively utilize contract operators. So we want to provide tools and information to help them wisely choose and manage contract operators. So some of the examples in this area for like compliance assistance, for example, several states allow sharing of certified operators among systems if there's reasonable travel time between work areas, such as a number of hours or miles distance, and then also like for emergency events, making sure that they can respond quickly enough to those kinds of events. In the area of funding assistance, a lot of you may be familiar with Maine's very small system compliance loan fund, and that would be for community systems that are less than 100 people being served, or in the area of non-community systems, nonprofit, non-transient, non-community systems are eligible. The state provides 100% principal forgiveness, and it's for the purpose of achieving compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act, such as perhaps repairing a wellhead or drilling a new well. And the amount of money that would be available per project is up to $50,000. Then another example is in the state of New Hampshire, the Department of Education has state aid funds which assist schools in building infrastructure, and that could include water treatment if it's necessary. In the third area, we're looking at ways to efficiently and effectively use our resources. So we're looking for ways to leverage authorities of other agencies and target compliance assistance very strategically. So some opportunities here are coordination with other offices within the drinking water program, such as the SRF program or enforcement, and of course the capacity development and operator certification programs should be part of all that coordination internally. There are opportunities with other state agencies, such as licensing and certification boards, for example, local sanitarians, local zoning departments, and then finally, just looking at external organizations, such as chambers of commerce, realtor boards, trade associations, that sort of thing, utilizing those organizations to be able to get information out or to provide education, for example. So some examples here, Nebraska coordinates with Department of Agriculture and the Liquor Control Commission, who handle the food and liquor dispensing permitting requirements, and they would coordinate with those agencies to enforce drinking water violations and to identify new non-community systems. Then looking at technical assistance through third parties, for example, in Nebraska, they contract with the Rural Water Association using their 2% drinking water SRF set-aside funds, and they provide 8 field representatives who then visit the systems annually, and they also contact new system owners to inform them of the requirements and provide technical assistance. In the area of capacity assistance, Michigan, for example, requires a permit application as well as a capacity development plan for all new non-transient, non-community systems, and that requires new systems to document their technical, managerial, and financial plan. They also ask specific questions of the system and its management, and they also provide information on sampling that's required for that specific type of system. In Vermont, there's a capacity evaluation for non-transient, non-community systems, especially schools, and that includes recommendations for the school to help address any deficiencies that they may have identified during their investigation. So, as I mentioned briefly, the workgroup report also includes an appendix, which has kind of a comprehensive listing of the various practices, the various tools, practices, publications, other resources that we discussed and found out about during our discussions in the work group. And included for each of these resources is a contact person or a link where the information can be found. So it includes all the examples that I just briefly covered just now, as well as many others. Like I said, it's over 100 different tools and other resources. So this compilation has been posted on the ASDWA website, and it'll be periodically updated just to keep the information up to date, and then we'll be adding to it. And then hopefully this is the beginning today of just getting a good networking going, so we'll become aware of other practices that are not included in here. So we encourage you to let us know about other things that you think should be added. And right after the webinar is over, we'll send out specific information to you on how to access that information and how to get to the ASDWA website. I should also mention that the workgroup report also includes another appendix, and that appendix summarizes federal sources of funding that may be available to non-community systems. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the total document should be up on EPA's website, hopefully by late spring, early summer. So now we have just a couple minutes here. If anyone has any questions at this point, as I mentioned, we're going to have time after each speaker for questions, so you can submit them now or you can submit it later, and we'll get to your question on your screen now. So we'd like to just move along rather than take up more time with Q&A. We'll try to catch up with Q&As later on. So we'd like to share with you just a couple examples of how states are using or how states are addressing their non-community system challenges. So first we'll hear from the state of Maine. We're pleased to have with us Sarah Flanagan, who's the Capacity Development Coordinator for the Maine Drinking Water Program. Sarah assists water systems with their technical, managerial, and financial capacity, and she's also the Security Coordinator for the Drinking Water Program, and she helps systems with their security and emergency preparedness and response needs. She manages the Capacity Development Grant Program and the Sanitary Seal WellCap Program, and she's got a Bachelor of Science degree in Ecology and Environmental Science from the University of Maine. So Sarah, we're turning it over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Today I'm going to be giving you a quick overview of Maine's public water systems, and I'll then go into our most common problems that we see with our non-community water systems and what we've been doing to tackle these problems. Next slide, please. The Maine Drinking Water Program is the agency with oversight for public water systems in Maine, and it's within the Department of Health and Human Services and the Maine Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Our 38 staff members are broken into 5 teams. We have a field inspection team, compliance and enforcement team, water resources team, information management team, and a subsurface wastewater team. We currently have about 1,900 water systems in Maine, serving nearly 850,000 Maine residents and visitors. And out of that, about 80% of the public water systems serve non-community water systems. Next slide. We see a lot of issues with our non-community water systems and proper wellhead protection. That ranges from storing contaminants near their wells, such as cleaners, paints, or gasoline, or not properly protecting their wellhead from vandalism, or not protecting it from vehicle traffic. Another big issue our field inspectors report is problems with the well caps not being properly secured or sealed, which can introduce contaminants and cause problems with the total coliform pits. Next slide. Amongst the most common problems we see with non-community water systems is missampling, sampling errors, and improper collection of samples, especially total coliform sampling. Some of the issues are caused from failing to disinfect the end of the faucet first, not handling the bottles properly, or not even collecting it from the designated sampling site. A lot of this can be due to staff turnover and lack of training. We've seen this especially in our seasonal systems. Additionally, we've seen issues with seasonal systems and their failure to collect samples within the correct sampling period. Laboratory reporting issues are also very common. A lot of the time that can be attributed to filling out the laboratory chain of custody wrong and not including their public water system ID number. The expenses related to being a public water system can also be a hurdle for non-community water systems, especially the non-transient non-community systems, which in addition to sampling must also have a licensed water operator. In particular, the daycares report that this is a burden for them, especially for those first coming on board and having to do the initial round of sampling. Our field inspectors also report that missing or inadequate raw water sampling taps to comply with the groundwater rule is often an issue with these smaller systems. Next slide. For non-community water systems, especially the transient systems that are not required to have a licensed operator, properly maintaining and monitoring the treatment system can be a challenge, particularly for those systems using continuous chlorination disinfection, getting them to both properly measure and record the chlorine residuals collectively on their monthly operating reports and then submit them to our office on time. That's a really big challenge for us. Our field inspectors report that a common problem they encounter when they visit these water systems is changes being made to treatment systems without prior authorization, such as installing bypasses, adding treatment, or even removing it. In some cases, they may not be using certified chemicals either. Next slide, please. There are several places within a non-community water system where cross connections can be present, from dump stations at campgrounds without proper backflow preventers to schools with no backflow preventers on their fire suppression systems, or hoses attached to utility sinks. Additionally, we have many seasonal systems in Maine, from golf courses to ski resorts to summer camps, that had to start up and shut down their water systems for the season. And another problem facing these non-community water systems is how to deal with loss of pressure events from broken water lines, well pump failures, or even power outages, and try to maintain the safe drinking water quality in their system. Our field inspectors report that issues with proper storage tank maintenance, including flushing, disinfection, and even the proper seals and protections in place to prevent contaminants from entering the storage tanks, such as screen vents, overflows, and properly sealed hatches. Next slide, please. Other common problems we encounter with non-community water systems include a lack of record keeping of information about the water system or well. A lot of these systems don't look at themselves as public water systems. It's not something that's on the forefront of their minds or even their business. As a result, we see a wide range of owners and operators who have little or no experience in maintaining a water system. They often lack a written plan for what will happen in the event of emergency. With staff turnover and lack of training, this can compound the problem and make a need for a written emergency response plan and standard operating procedures even more important. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about some of the things we're doing to address issues that we're seeing with non-community water systems. They need information relevant and useful to them in terms they can understand. They don't necessarily see themselves as a public water system, so we needed to figure out a way to get the point across to them. So we developed a core message that's centered around 4 key principles for a water system to be able to deliver safe drinking water. Protect your source, take your samples, maintain your treatment, and inspect your pipes and tanks. We wanted these 4 principles to act as a guide for public water systems in maintaining and operating their systems. From large systems to small, the principles are the same. So we set out to develop educational and outreach campaign designed around each of these 4 principles. Next slide. One of the very first things we did was to develop a half-page, double-sided, quick reference sheet to get to water systems as a visual reminder of the 4 things they can do to keep their drinking water safe. And you'll see that on the left-hand side of the screen. On the front side, there are photos that correspond to each of the key principles, and then on the back side, there are specific tasks and reminders of what they should be doing. We also created magnets, which you'll see on the right hand of the screen, that also have the 4 key principles, our contact information, and we hope that water systems stick them somewhere that will remind them to maintain their water systems. We hand both of these items out during site visits and at conferences. Next slide. Here's a close-up of the front with a picture and the back with a checklist showing some tasks and reminders. Next slide. Next, we wanted to educate all of our staff on the core message and make sure that each staff person was on board and aware of the new outreach strategy, we developed a training session for each of the 4 teams to focus on what they can do to encourage and spread the word about the core message. We wanted them to be able to deliver the entire 4-part message. For example, our field inspection team would probably focus more on the treatment and distribution aspects of the water system maintenance. And by training them on the core message, we hope that they were encouraged to also ask water systems about the sampling and source protection. We then asked all the staff for ideas on resources and materials we could develop to help them deliver the message and help them educate water systems and tackle some of the common issues and problems that we're seeing. That spawned ideas for the development of a number of fact sheets. So we created a process for developing fact sheets and then came up with a standard template for the fact sheets as so to brand them. We focused on providing simple language that water systems could follow and understand. And we also wanted to make sure to include a picture relevant to what the fact sheet was about. And at first we couldn't find a lot of pictures for small systems, so we actually asked our field inspection team for pictures. We went out on site with them during sanitary surveys and took pictures so we could include them in the fact sheet. So now we have a good collection of photos that we can use in our outreach materials. Next slide. So now I'm going to go through some of our fact sheets. Next slide. Here you'll see one of our fact sheets. At the top we have the Maine CDC logo with our contact information, and at the bottom we have our core message. And this is the template that we use for all of our fact sheets. Next slide. And all of our fact sheets are 1 to 2 pages. This is the second page of the fact sheet. And now we're just going to quickly flip through some of the fact sheets we developed that are relevant to smaller water systems. Guidance for small water systems with disinfection. Small systems responding to the loss of pressure events. Protecting public health during a chlorination system failure. What public water system consumers should know about boil water orders. Preparing your seasonal water system for winter. How to become a very small water system licensed water operator. So that was just a sampling of what we have for fact sheets. We have them for larger water systems as well. Once we developed some of these fact sheets, we decided to make a binder to hold all the fact sheets. We sorted them by which of the 4 core principles they related to, and then handed them out to field staff, compliance staff, and technical service providers. Field staff take them out into the field with them and have expressed how nice it is to be able to look through the binder and offer resources to smaller systems when they're on site. Next slide. We also developed a transient guidebook. It's a short guidebook that helps transient systems better understand what it means to be a public water system and what they need to do, like emergency response, sampling and reporting, record keeping, cross connections, wellhead protection, and lab reporting. Next slide. And this is the front cover to the transient guidebook. It's nice and colorful. Next slide. We developed sampling schedules for all of our water systems, and they're sent out every February. The schedule outlines all the water tests that are due for the year, and the schedule can also be found online for those who want to look it up throughout the year, in case they don't know what their paper copy is. All they have to do is go onto our website, enter their public water system ID number, and they get their water system specific sampling schedule. So it's right at their fingertips. Next slide. Sampling reminder calls are made for water systems on quarterly monitoring. It's still a relatively new process for us, and we're currently working on a way to track the effectiveness of making all these reminder phone calls. Preliminary results are looking like they've made an impact. The calls have also helped us keep track of contact information for some of the water systems, like new cell phone numbers, emergency contact phone numbers, or email addresses. Next slide. We have a contract with Maine Rural Water Association to have 2 water quality specialists provide free on-site technical assistance with a focus to our transient water systems without an operator. They help with reviewing operation of a treatment process, sampling schedules, answering questions, and finding leaks. All the water system has to do is call. In addition, we can also refer water systems for a visit. We also offer any water system that experiences a total call form positive result with the option of having one of our field inspectors or a Maine water quality specialist come on site and do a free recheck sample. And our staff or Maine Rural Water staff also speak with the system to determine perhaps if there was a problem on site or if there was a problem with sampling collection, which may have caused a total coliform positive hit. Next slide. We offer some financial assistance programs. So we have a sanitary seal well cap program that provides a reimbursement of 75% of the purchase and installation cost of a sanitary seal well cap with a maximum $250 reimbursement per water system. Since the program began in 2011, we've had over 30 sanitary seal caps installed. We also offer source water protection grants to help water systems protect their source. Eligible water systems can receive $5,000 grants. Next slide. Consolidation grant funding is available to consolidate water systems, basically a smaller system with a more viable public water system to enhance system capacity and deregulate an existing public water system. For example, a mobile home park that consolidates with a water district. This grant program funds 75% of the cost of the consolidation for nonprofit water systems, or 50% of the cost for for-profit systems. And there's a $100,000 cap to this program. And as Steve spoke about earlier, we do have a very small system compliance loan program, which provides funding so water systems with compliance issue can be brought back into compliance. We've done a bunch of installation for treatment systems for radon, uranium, arsenic, and lead. Next slide, please. We developed an emergency response template for water systems serving less than 500 people. It's available in paper copy, or you can find it electronically on our website. It has helpful resources for water systems, such as a list of emergency numbers, information on their water source, pumping and treatment, and a plan of action that should be taken during an emergency. Next slide. Annually, we work with Maine Rural Water Association to hold opening for the season training for transient systems in multiple locations in Maine. The training goes through seasonal startup and shutdown, federal and state drinking water rules and regulations, water sampling tips, submitting water testing results and reports, water conservation and leak detection, and protecting their source and system. Next slide, please. We're working on a way to track the effectiveness of our outreach methods to see if they're helping water systems. We have had positive feedback from staff and water systems with our outreach methods thus far. And in 2013, we saw a downward trend in violations to all water system types. Next slide. And any questions?
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sarah. We actually do have a few questions here. One is when there is a violation of the system and then the monitoring schedule changes, is that updated online? Or how does the system remain aware of changes to their sampling schedule?
They are alerted through a letter that's sent out that changes the monitoring schedule. Okay.
And then someone was asking if quarterly calls are done using an auto dial, like a robo dialer, or is it a real person calling?
We actually have a real person that sits down and calls all these systems.
Great.
I believe it's our whole compliance team that does that.
Okay, so you have that personal touch. That's excellent.
Yep.
Someone is asking here, they say, Sarah, Maine used to produce a calendar with monitoring and reporting dates and other milestones. Does Maine still produce such a calendar as a reminder tool?
We don't. The amount of time it actually took to put the calendar together, and we weren't really sure these calendars were being used, so it's, weighing the amount of staff time to develop this, we decided not to continue to make it.
Okay. And then in your sanitary seal well cap program, would you consider extending the program to other organizations other than just nonprofits?
The sanitary seal well cap program is actually for all public water systems.
Okay. Okay, great. Someone is asking here, could you explain the function of the subsurface wastewater team?
The subsurface wastewater team was kind of absorbed when one of the managers of the team retired. It doesn't really have anything to do with drinking water, but they need to be managed. Basically, they do anything related to private septic tanks, from site evaluations, making sure they're functioning properly, violations, licensing, and things like that.
Okay. And then someone asks about the Maine Rural Water Association, as to where they obtain their funding to provide the technical assistance.
That actually comes from one of our set-asides for the drinking water SRF.
Okay, great. And then here's another question about funding. They're asking, how were these outreach programs funded? The well cap sealing, free assistance through rural water, which you just mentioned, colored publications for outreach, et cetera. Where'd you find funding for all that?
Yep, it all comes out of our, I believe, our 15% set aside for our drinking water SRF.
Okay, great. And I have one final question here that's kind of a tough one, and I guess we're always asking this of ourselves, but how do you measure that your outreach efforts have made a difference?
Yeah, we're not really sure on that, how we're going to measure that. Like, say, phone calls, we're not sure if those have made a difference yet. I guess we're trying to see how the violations are going and if they're going in a downward trend. We're assuming that we've made some kind of impression and that our outreach efforts are helping these water systems stay in compliance.
Yeah, that's a question we're always trying to answer too, so we appreciate the difficulty in that. Actually, a couple more questions came in, and we have a little bit of time. So there's one question about certified labs in Maine. Just approximately how many labs there are that are certified, and does the state lab do most or all of the determinations?
I'm unsure about that. I'd have to get back to you.
Okay. Okay, and then the loan forgiveness program, the $50,000 loan, what requirements are there to obtain one of those loans?
For the, I'm assuming the very small system compliance loan?
Yes, I think so.
I believe you have to be a community system or a non-community, non-profit system. I don't think for-profit systems are eligible.
Right, right. And then here's a question that maybe it's more appropriate for Erica, but how long did it take for the state to develop the 4-core messaging approach, and who made up that team that developed that?
Yeah, I'm not really sure about how long that took. Probably a few months, and I would say it was the managers that were involved in developing the core message. That sounds like something they would have been doing.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate your presentation, and thank you for being here. And please hang on in case we get any questions at the very end.
Okay.
So next, we'd like to move along to Julie Spangler. We're pleased to have Julie here, who will be talking about Ohio's activities to improve the compliance of non-community systems. Julie's worked for over 20 years at Ohio EPA, and she's currently an environmental supervisor in the Division of Drinking and Groundwaters in Columbus, Ohio. Julie has a Bachelor of Science degree in biology with minors in chemistry and music from Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia. Julie?
Hello. I'll apologize in advance. I have a cold, so hopefully everybody can understand me with a cough drop in my mouth. But anyway, today I'm going to be discussing how Ohio is working to improve the compliance of non-community public water systems. So as Steve said, I'm in the Division of Drinking and Groundwaters, and so that's when I refer to Ohio EPA, or to us, that's what I'll be referring to. I'm going to go over the compliance tools and the enforcement tools that we use, as well as how we work with some of the other agencies. Over the years, Ohio EPA has tried many things to improve the compliance of non-community water systems. And out of our approximately 4,700 public water systems, we have about 74%, or around 3,500, that are non-communities. Next slide, please. So I'm in central office, which is right in the center in Franklin County, and we have 5 district offices. And I put the percentage of non-community systems per district, so you can sort of see that our Northeast District office have 81% non-community systems. So they have our most, and that's where we see a lot of the violations. And so this will give you an idea of how we disperse everything and all of the work. Next slide, please. So some of our compliance tools we use are required to retain our primacy. So that would be things like sanitary surveys, our operator certification program, scheduled monitoring for required contaminants, source designations, and our lab certification program. Next slide, please. Some other things that we do that we require would be plan approval. So public water systems have to have plan approval when they make a change, installing equipment that's not of like kind, things of that nature. Well site approvals, that way our district staff will know that the well is being sited in an acceptable area. And we also have a license to operate, and that I will discuss in greater detail a little bit later. Next slide, please. So we have many efforts to get increased compliance and prevent monitoring violations. One of these would be schedules. We send out our annual monitoring schedules, and we do also send the revised schedules and then schedules for new systems. We send out reminder postcards about a month prior to the end of the monitoring period. Then we do our automated reminder calls about 2 weeks after the postcards and 2 weeks prior to the end of the monitoring period. Then we also do personal calls, so we're trying every opportunity to get them to actually take their samples and not get a violation. We also do emails to those groups who have registered on our listserv to receive updates and notifications. Then, if they actually don't sample, we are out there we're getting the notices of violations sent out for whatever violations that they have. We also have limited scope site visits. Excuse me. These are performed by district staff, and it's usually as an effort to identify issues that might be causing total coliform positive results, or if they're having a lot of monitoring issues, then they're out discussing those issues with them, and just overall to encourage them to comply with the regulations and avoid enforcement. Now, as Stephen also mentioned when he was talking earlier, Ohio does have the startup and shutdown procedure for seasonal systems that we have available, and our district staff will go out and meet with people about that. Also, we have a transient public water system guide that was issued in 2003. So we're in the process of updating that and hope to have it up on our webpage as an updated version either by the end of this month or sometime in June. Next, just do one more click. This is an example of one of our postcards. So it's just telling you what we're reminding you to sample, that it's not a violation, but please get that sample before the end of the monitoring period. Okay, next slide, please. This is an example of our monitoring schedule. These usually go out the very end of December. And then, obviously, if there's a change, they're revised and sent out with the next, for the next monitoring period. All of our monitoring and compliance schedules can also be found on our website. For the non-communities, we also try to have that little graphic at the bottom to show them, hey, here's what we mean by your raw tap, here's what we mean by your entry point, so that way there's less confusion as to where they are supposed to take those samples. Next slide, please. All right, notices of violation. These have always been sent for monitoring violations, MCL exceedances. They detail the violation, what the parameter is, what the monitoring period is, excuse me, and what actions are needed to return to compliance. Some of the violations also require public notice, so it would have an example public notice and verification form. This year, we're starting to actually send them notices of violation to not only the owners, but also the administrative contact that we have in our database if they're different. That way, everybody should be notified. And when I say administrative contact, that might be the operator of record, the manager of the let's say, gas station or restaurant, or the superintendent, if it's different than who the owner's name is. Next slide, please. And this is an example of our notice of violation. And you'll see that it just lists the system name, monitoring period, what we did receive, if anything, and what actions required to come back into compliance. Next slide, please. Okay, our license to operate. This is a requirement that we have through our Ohio Revised Code that applies to most public water systems. The only systems that would be excluded would be churches and schools. And this would indicate, if you have a license to operate, that the public water system is approved by the agency to supply drinking water to the public. Excuse me. This is an annual requirement. When they do renew their license annually, the application must be submitted with the appropriate fee, which is nominal, and the license to operate, or LTO, must be prominently displayed at the facility. So anyone frequenting the establishment will be able to see that when they come in. Ohio EPA can take actions against the public water system's license to operate by either putting conditions on it or suspending, revoking, or denying the license. And we will issue different licenses depending on the facility's compliance with safe drinking water rules. We have even got a color-coded system that will represent the status of the license. And this is one of the tools we have been using for several years to try to address systems which don't have high ETT scores, or even the systems that are already under enforcement. Next slide, please. Okay, this is an example of a green or unconditioned license to operate. If you walked into a water system in Ohio and saw a green license to operate, you should feel pretty good that this public water system is in compliance. And most of our water systems in Ohio do receive green licenses. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to talk about enforcement tools that we would be able to use. So this could be actions on the license to operate. And as I mentioned earlier, it could be conditioned, suspended, denied, or revoked. We also use something called a bilateral compliance agreement, director's findings and orders, referral to the Attorney General's office, and then we have a couple of new enforcement tools we're beginning to use, and that would be expedited settlement agreements and our very new administrative penalty program. So these would come after we've tried everything else to try to get the water system into compliance. Excuse me. And then once we don't give a green license to operate, we're going to condition or suspend, then that would mean that those systems are in enforcement. Next slide, please. This is an example of a condition license to operate. So these would be yellow. And some of the examples of conditions that might be applied to this license would be to comply with their monitoring schedule, hire a certified operator, issue public notification, install treatment, things like that. And occasionally we do associate a penalty with the condition license to operate if it is appropriate. And these conditions will be printed on the back of this yellow certificate. So if you saw that hanging in an establishment, you could look at the back and see what they were required to do for the next time they could get a green license to operate. Next slide, please. So I thought this was a good time to talk about working with other agencies, since we've been working with these agencies for a long time, and we would copy these places on notices of violation, enforcement actions, sanitary surveys, also go to our Ohio Manufactured Homes Commission. And we also work with these agencies to try to ensure that each of their rules complement. Our rules complement theirs and theirs complement ours. Now with our LTO program, it really opened the door to work more efficiently with other agencies, because most of their rules require an approved water source as part of their criteria for issuing their licenses. So when we're conditioning a license or even denying, suspending, or revoking a license, this becomes more interesting to these agencies. We have used this approach several times and been successful for many non-community systems, such as bars, restaurants, and campgrounds, and we're either getting them back into compliance or actually getting them out of the business altogether. All right, next slide, please. This is an example, a little blurry example, I guess, but it's an example of our red. It's not even, it's a red sign. It's not a license to operate, because this would mean they don't have one, that their license has either been denied, suspended, or revoked. We do this via a proposed action of the director, and they're taken due to continued violations of safe drinking water rules. They are appealable, so the water system, could appeal it, and usually they do, and it gets adjudicated, and the assistant attorney general gets assigned to the case, and then they work on coming to some kind of agreement. Once a license is actually denied, revoked, or suspended, and if it's gone through the appeal process or they haven't appealed, but our final action is denial, suspension, or revocation, that water system is not permitted to provide water for human consumption. Suspensions can be from 6 months to a year. Denials and revocations can be from 1 year to 5 years. Next slide, please. Now, we also use a bilateral compliance agreement. This is when a system has had few minor violations, but appears to be fairly compliant. Usually we would do this if they haven't had a previous enforcement action. And it's our lowest form of enforcement. It's informal, it's non-binding. It's actually signed by the owner or operator after they've agreed to this, and it's also signed by our chief of drinking water. There's no penalty. It's usually items that can be taken care of in a year or less. And this, just so you know, this bilateral compliance agreement is not recognized by US EPA as an official enforcement action. So we typically would do agreements that would include monitoring as required. Sometimes in this, if we can get them to agree to it, if they haven't been monitoring, we'll ask that they contract with a certified lab or an operator to actually take their samples for them, and then they get them on a schedule and they don't miss the sampling that way. And sometimes it's for correcting minor violations with their wells, like fixing their well cap. We have also started to use BCAs to address systems with disinfection byproduct violations that are already in the process of addressing the problem, and their ETT scores maybe aren't high enough yet. We're trying to nip them in the bud before they start being out of compliance at a level that they'll require higher enforcement action. Next slide, please. All right, director's findings and orders. If returning to compliance will take more than a year, or if it's going to require numerous steps, or if the system just has been in enforcement before and is just not cooperative, then normally our next step would be to send proposed findings and orders to that system. Proposed orders are negotiated, and we usually have a settlement meeting with the system and try to get them on a schedule that will bring them back into compliance. And these aren't appealable. And we also sometimes will do unilateral orders, and they aren't negotiated, so they could be appealed. And they only have 30 days to appeal these types of actions. These orders would typically include monitoring and installation of treatment, submittal plans, that type of thing. And occasionally there will be a penalty associated with these. Next slide, please. Referral to the Attorney General's office is usually our last-ditch effort. We've exhausted all of our compliance actions that we can, and we would refer the case over to our Ohio Attorney General's office. This would be usually concluded with either a consent order that they would negotiate, or occasionally it has been filed with the court and gone to trial. And these always will have a penalty involved, as well as any injunctive relief that we would need to have done in order to keep the water, or get the water system back into compliance. Next slide, please. All right, now I'm going to talk about some of our new tools that we're using. The expedited settlement agreement is actually a quicker approach to get systems back into compliance. The public water system has to agree to comply and pay a penalty, and then send that back in. They can't appeal this action, and we use our civil penalty calculation. So the penalties are nominal, but it helps avoid the time and expense associated with escalated enforcement action. We actually started this, excuse me, with addressing those systems that don't have an operator of record that were required. And we saw great compliance with that, with the few systems that we did our first round of that with. And then we may also use an expedited settlement agreement this year with those systems that did not pay for their license to operate fees. So I'll have more information on how well that goes if we actually go through with that this year. Then we are also planning to use the expedited settlement agreement for our newest program, which is the administrative penalty program. Next slide, please. The administrative penalty program, this is our newest tool. We have high hopes that it will reduce the number of monitoring violations, increasing our compliance rates with all systems, especially the non-community systems. This won't replace NOVs. The notices of violation will still be used as in the past. They'll be issued as required. We're still going to go through all of our other steps of, the postcards that I mentioned, the robocalls, the reminder personal phone calls. All of those things will still take place. If they don't monitor, they'll still get a notice of violation. However, if they actually have a violation for monitoring of total coliform or nitrate, then they will be assessed a penalty for each monitoring violation that they receive during the required monitoring period. The monitoring period for our first round actually began January 1st, 2014, and our first round is going to begin with warning letters, and those will go out around the middle of this month. What we're doing to ensure that we don't send these out uncalled for is to make sure that the notices of violation have gone out, and it gives more than enough time for the water system to get that sample in if the lab for some reason did not get the sample mailed in. So we're going to try our best to not send any of these out to systems that actually didn't have a monitoring violation. Excuse me. Down at the bottom is our little nifty slogan we came up with is Save a Dime, Sample on Time. And that was pretty catchy, so we've really enjoyed using it. I'll show you a couple things we've done later. All right, next slide, please. So you might be wondering, why would we want to penalize, give an actual monetary penalty for something like this? Well, as it stands, samples for nitrate and total coliform, they cost $20 to $25 a piece. The penalties will be a minimum of $150 per violation. So this will make it financially beneficial to collect the sample rather than in the past when they could possibly save money by picking and choosing quarters to sample in. So now they're not going to be able to save money by not sampling. They're actually going to be paying more. For some systems, they'll be paying a penalty that would cost more than if they would have done all their samples for that year. Next slide, please. All right, do one more click for me. Thank you. So we sent out these postcards. We started public outreach in around August of 2013. And this was one of the postcards that we sent just to basically say, hey, here's what we're going to be doing. So Start sampling, get in the habit. Okay, click again, please. We also did website announcements. And we've kept these types of things on there so people will remember that they need to sample. In case they forgot that at some point, click again, please. We did newsletters to a lot of different types of places. For example, we have our own newsletter that we do. So we had an article there. We worked with other organizations, smallwatersupply.org, which has always got great articles. They actually put an article in there about that too. We did automated calls. If you could click again, please. We did letters to health departments and trade organizations to let them know that this was coming, and if they had any meetings, they could give their members a heads up or put it on their website. Click again, please. And these are listserv messages or email messages that go out to the groups that sign up to receive updates. Click again, please. Then this is the monitoring schedule I showed you earlier, but at the bottom, I didn't point this out, but at the bottom, we have a reminder on everybody's monitoring schedule that will remind them, hey, you need to take this sample. And over to the right of that, you can see the round magnet. It sounds like magnets are popular after Sarah said that they send out magnets too. So we sent out magnets with our monitoring schedules. And we tested the magnets to make sure that they would hold 1 or 2 pieces of paper, so they can always, take their monitoring schedules and just put it up on a piece of their shelving or something, so they'll always be right there to remind them. And one more click, please. Maybe 2 more clicks. All right, thanks. Oh, and just to let you know, the penalty money that we collect from that program will go into the Drinking Water Protection Fund and be used to administer the Safe Drinking Water Act in Ohio. And since we've done all that public outreach, we have seen slight improvement of compliance. And that's just by looking at the number of violations that we had last year for the first 3 quarters, and then looked at the 4th quarter, and it had a very slight improvement. So we're hoping that that will continue. All right. So just to go over our administrative penalty program in sort of steps to make it a little clearer, our step 1 is to run quarterly determinations to see who actually is in violation of their monitoring of total coliform or nitrate. And we are just starting out with those 2 right now. And if the program's successful, then we can always expand it into other types of sampling. We leave time for the NOVs to be issued and time to ensure that the violations are validated. Next slide, please. Our next step will be a warning letter. Now, this round, everyone that is a violator will get a warning letter. The next time, we're going to have a tracking system that if they have already gotten a warning letter, then the next time they'll get an expedited settlement agreement. So the warning letters are only for first offenders, or if somebody new purchases the property and we aren't going to punish them. If we find out that it's a new owner, then they would also receive a warning letter. The expedited settlement agreement would be used for those on the second time that they get the violation, and they would need to agree to comply with their monitoring schedule in the future and pay their penalty, which would be a minimum of $150. They'll have 30 days to sign this agreement and pay the penalty. And then if they don't, then we'll take further action. Now, you might want to know, well, what if they were sick, or what if this or that? These are regardless of the reason. So if your sample broke and you didn't get a sample in, you will still get that penalty and expedited settlement agreement. Next slide, please. And step 3 would be if you chose to not sign the ESA and pay your penalty, then we will be issuing unilateral administrative orders. So the penalty for these would be $250 to $1,000. So it would behoove the system, obviously, to sign their ESA and pay the $150. The $250 to $1,000 is per violation. So if they had multiple violations during that monitoring period, that quarter, then it would add on to each one. This one has 45 days for them to submit the payment. These are unilateral, so they don't have to agree to it. They don't have to sign anything. They just need to pay the penalty. They can appeal these because it is unilateral. And if they do choose to appeal, that would cost a mandatory filing fee of at least $70. And then there's possible attorney costs, and possibly if they go that far, the penalty could change at that point. There's a little box down there to show you what our administrative penalty calculations could be. So we really feel that this administrative penalty approach will significantly improve the compliance of all of our public water systems, especially the non-community systems. But until we get a few more quarters under our belt, or a few quarters, I guess, since we just started this, we won't know for sure what the impact is. So hopefully I'll be back either later this year or early next year to give you some results of this. And we are all hoping, at least in Ohio, we're really hoping that this is a great success, and we'll get those systems that, water, they say water is not their business, they're a restaurant or whatever, and they're not in the water business. Maybe we'll get them to actually think a little bit better of it and start taking their samples. All right, next slide, please. All right, well, thank you. And if you have any questions, I guess you just put them in the box. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. Excellent presentation. I know it's not easy with your cold, but thank you. I'm glad that your voice held up.
Me too. I'm glad I didn't cough.
We got quite a few questions, and we probably won't have time to cover them all because we're going to have to wrap up pretty soon. But a number of questions related around the color-coded forms that you have to put up on the wall in the business establishment. And I guess the questions revolve around questions like, what if they don't display it? Are there any penalties for that? How do you know that the system will post the notice, and what are the penalties for failure to post the notice? And then does that result, red one, result in kind of a mandatory shutdown of the business establishment? And then also, can a business establishment continue maybe by serving bottled water? So I don't know if you want to tackle those questions.
Okay. I'll start with the ones about the denied, or the red sign.
Yes.
Those systems are not to be producing water. They don't have an approved license. It's either been denied, revoked, or suspended. So they are not supposed to be providing water to the public. Now, depending on what the establishment is and what their requirements are, with let's say it's a restaurant and their requirements with the health department, I'm not sure that providing bottled water would meet those requirements. But if maybe they could. We've had systems bring in hot water. If it's an approved, that has to go through a plan approval and all of that type of thing. Bottled water obviously wouldn't. So hopefully that helps answer the question that they are not supposed to be providing water to the public. Fortunately, we haven't had this happen. We've almost had it happen with a community system once, but as of right now, I don't think that we have had that actually go through with a community. So it's usually the smaller systems. If it was a public health threat and we needed to, obviously, we would shut down a larger system, and then they would have to do the bottled water. Okay. So hopefully that helps with that. And then the posting, the way that we regulate with everything, with the certified operators and with the water systems, it's a self-reporting, and we have to trust that they are doing things that we tell them to do. So there is that, there's a trust factor to a point. Now, when our district staff are out there, if they don't see it, they can write that up in the survey letter as a violation. So far, we haven't actually issued a penalty for anybody, for not having their sign up. as far as I know, we don't get a lot of feedback that that's happening, that they're not posting those. Now, they may post them the day that our survey person's coming out. You know, sometimes that's really hard to track, and with as many systems as we have, it's pretty difficult. But we do our best to try to make sure that they're doing that.
Okay, great. Let me just ask one last question here, just because we're running out of time. But with regard to the license to operate, what is the time frame? Well, first of all, how much does it cost? What is the time frame for a conditional license to operate? And does the license to operate follow a system or a person? So, like, for example, if the operator changes, then is that a way to get to compliance?
Okay. I'll just concentrate on non-community systems because it's a little easier as far as knowing the cost. I can't remember the percentage that it is for the communities, but the pretty much standard cost for an LTO for, let's say, a transient or non-community system is $112 a year. And excuse me, this could increase if they are late. Then they have to pay a late fee, which is like 10%. So it could go up a little bit. Now they are more, the licenses are more, they're per service connection, I believe, for community systems. So, but it's about $112 for groundwater systems that are non-community. And this is for a year. It's usually through, I believe that the date is through January 30th. So it would be active from January 30th of a year through the next year. But they're supposed to be paid by the end of December. Does that make, hopefully that makes sense. I start to ask questions, but nobody can answer me. So anyway, so it's an annual licensing. And then this actually goes with the water system, not with an operator or an owner. It's with the actual system.
Okay, great. There are a number of other questions too, but we're just going to have to move along. So it definitely sparked interest, and maybe you know, one of the things that we'd like to do is to have future webinars, future discussions through various forums. So maybe this is a topic that we can bring up that way, and we can kind of plunge in a little bit more depth into the Ohio program. So thank you so much, Julie. Now we'd like to move on to the next steps, and to kick that off, we're going to have Jerry Smith, who's with the state of Minnesota, and he has been working for more than 25 years in the Minnesota Department of Health, working with non-community water systems and their operators. So Jerry, can you start to wrap it up here?
Great, I will do that, Steve, and just let me know when I need to get off of the line so you can wrap things up. I guess first I just wanted to say we've had a great conversation today, and the size of our audience indicates that there is a high level of interest in the topic of non-community systems, how to best communicate with system personnel, and how to help them maintain compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. The fact that we've got still a number of questions that the audience has that we haven't had a chance to get to shows this level of interest. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Mindy and Steve and their efforts to host this webinar today to kick off the Best Management Practices document. Also, my thanks to Sarah and Julie for sharing with us their compliance tools that their states are already using to support non-community systems' Safe Drinking Water Act compliance. And so, as before we sign off today, we wanted to explore some next steps that we're proposing to keep the conversation going and to keep sharing information that is useful to our audience. First, we think it is valuable to have an ongoing discussion at the national level regarding non-community system topics. As we mentioned earlier, non-community systems represent approximately 2/3 of the public water systems in the nation. We are proposing to use a number of communication tools that are available to us. From personal experience, Minnesota has found it invaluable to keep the conversation going beyond the state level, and in our case, at the regional level. Since 1991, the Region 5 non-community program managers have met regularly to discuss a variety of non-community water systems compliance topics. This was an idea initiated by the state of Michigan, and a hint as to how long I've been working with non-community systems, I was at the original meeting in 1991. A number of you may already be receiving periodic blog posts from the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators. We will be working with ASWA staff to include posts that will highlight relevant information on non-community system topics so that the audience will be aware of such things as upcoming webinars, useful websites, tools, and other resources. You can become a member of the blog distribution list by registering on the ASWA website. Anyone can be a member of the blog distribution, including local sanitarians, technical assistance providers. Some of you may be aware of the Capacity Development Operator Certification community on the ASWA website, which does include a discussion forum. This forum, though, is limited and open to EPA and state regulatory staff only. We will occasionally be posting topics for discussion related to non-community systems and encourage other forum members to do the same. This was a great way to get feedback from states regarding their approach to challenges that you may be facing in your own state today. As Stephen mentioned, we will be shortly sending out more detailed instructions to all of our webinar registrants on how to join either of these ASWA groups. We can also reach our audience through periodic email distributions, either through ASWA to state primacy agencies or EPA mailings to certain target audiences, such as today's webinar registrants or participants in particular workshops. Non-community system topics non-community system topics can certainly be part of the discussion at the ASWA annual conferences. That is this fall. That next conference is scheduled for October 19th to the 23rd in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We also found that last year there was a high level of interest in non-community systems compliance issues among those attendees of the 10th annual Small Systems Drinking Water Workshop in Cincinnati. This is a workshop that is co-hosted by US EPA and ASWA. We are planning to have another workshop this year and certainly want to include non-community topics as one of the focus areas for presentations and discussion. We want to hear from our audience today as to what are your hot topics that you would like to hear more about from your colleagues. Also, we want to find out what is the best way to reach you. Will one of these methods that we just mentioned work for you, or are there better ways to make sure that you are included in any future discussions or get your questions out there? Please use the question box in the tool panel on your screen to type in your response to these questions and click send to submit it to us. Just submit your information at any time before we conclude this webinar. It's great. I can't really say how great it is to have a go-to resources like the non-community best practices document in the appendixes, which to me are the heart and soul of that document. I also wanted to mention a website, and Julie has mentioned it already today as well, that I use frequently in my Safe Drinking Water Act compliance searches on a number of topic areas, not just related to non-community systems. And that website is the smallwatersupply.org. The website is created specifically for small water and wastewater operators to find resources on a large range of important topics. But while created for operators, I think others will find this website useful as well. There are a number of blog categories on the website, including one specifically for non-community water systems. And with that, I want to thank you for your time today. Keep sending those questions in and ways we can reach you. And with that, I will turn the microphone back to Steve.
Thank you, Jerry. And as Jerry mentioned, please, right now, just be using that question box to send us ideas. What are the hot topics? What are the issues that you'd like to hear more about? What are some other ways that we can get information out to you? What we'll do is we'll actually keep the line open for an extra 5 minutes so that you can just continue to submit questions or submit your ideas. One thing I just wanted to mention very briefly here before we close is in addition to having just this continuing dialogue and discussion, we wanted to make sure that these various tools and resources and information that we've been talking about, we just wanted to make sure it's available to you. So as we mentioned earlier, we've posted the compendium of the best practices. We've put that up on the ASWA website, and we're going to keep that updated as much as we can. And we definitely want to hear from you about any additional kinds of things that you want people to be aware of that we can add to that list. I briefly mentioned that we hope to have webinars maybe about once a quarter to address various non-community topics. So please, once again, use your question box there to submit ideas for topics that you'd like to hear about. And we're considering tentatively for the next webinar to maybe look at or have a presentation on the revised total coliform rule and how it applies to non-community systems and what resources would be most helpful for keeping systems in compliance. So any other topics, whatever, please let us know. Use that question box. And we're Another thing that might be available to us, I mentioned that our technology is being upgraded here, and in spite of being annoying during webinar presentations, one of the features that we hope to add to our arsenal here is the Microsoft SharePoint, which allows us to be able to share documents and other information with a team or a work group or some other audience. So once that tool is available to us, we'll take a look at it and see how useful that might be for this purpose, for sharing information with this audience. So if you have any other ideas about how we can share information, please let us know. Next slide. Okay. So finally, we just wanted to mention that it's going to be important to keep the non-community systems in mind as we develop various outreach and guidance and training sorts of sessions on various drinking water topics, such as the revised total coliform rule, treatment approaches for control for Legionella, as well as possible guidance on climate resiliency for water utilities or for conducting sanitary surveys. So the Drinking Water Workshop in Cincinnati, as we mentioned earlier, will continue to be a forum where we can discuss some of these issues. So we wanted to, once again, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for being on board with us. Thank you for our presenters. And we are concluding the webinar. We'll leave the line open for your submitting of ideas and topics. We'll leave that open for about another 5 minutes. So please submit them to us, but we're concluding our presentation for today. As you can see on the screen, just contact either me, Steve Hoagie, or Jerry Smith with any further ideas that you want, anything that you weren't able to share with us today. So thank you so much, and this concludes our presentation. The lines will be open for about another 4 or 5 minutes. Thank you.